At SD Bullion, our everyday low prices are already lower than the big boys' so-called flash sales. One of the fastest growing bullion companies in the country, SD Bullion, just claimed a spot on the prestigious Inc. 500. So you have to ask yourself, why haven't you joined over 30,000 new customers who've recently made the switch to SD Bullion for the lowest gold, silver, and platinum bullion prices? To learn more, go to www.sdbullion.com and enjoy the lowest prices in the precious metals industry, period.
We paid $402 billion in interest last year, the U.S. government did. Well, you know what that could buy? The U.S. government's interest on the debt would have paid for 3 years of all global gold and silver production. So that just goes to show you how insane the system has become.
Hey friends, welcome back. I am so thrilled to have on the line Steve St. Angelo from SRS Rocco Report. He's one of the most lucid analysts in the independent media today. And Steve, first of all, welcome back. And second of all, thank God you're here because I have some very important questions to ask you about the decline of the U.S. economy. How are you?
I'm doing great, Sean. Thanks for the invite, and I'm looking forward to talking with you. I know some of the analysts out there, I hear that they're having some trouble finding things to talk about, but that's the exact opposite trouble or problem with me. There's just way too much. We could talk for hours, so let's start.
Okay, here's where I wanted to start. You do some extraordinary real digging and reporting as to what's going on behind the scenes, the thermodynamic oil collapse that's coming. In this latest article, delusional mainstream media distorts the disaster and reality as we head over the cliff. I want you to outline some of the most important things from your recent article, and then let's get into this thermodynamic oil collapse.
Okay, well, I'm still fighting against let's say the assumption or the incorrect idea of that there is no peak oil. There's abiotic oil, and we're not going to peak in oil. That's a big elite conspiracy, and so I'm still fighting against that, or not I. A lot of people are. So that is a ideology out there that at some point in time will disappear, because just like the Earth, people thought the Earth was flat or that the Earth was the center of the solar system, it wasn't. And so it took science a while to get the whole world to understand that. Well, this is the same thing what's going to happen with peak oil and the falling energy return on investment. However, there was the delusional thinking is that we're going to have this new oil find in Alaska that this company, a small company, supposedly just found. They say it's between 6 and 10 billion barrels, but according to their analysis, they can only extract about 3 billion barrels at the best case scenario for them. And in my article, I showed that if they could extract it, that's only about less than 6 months' supply for the United States, or it comes out to be a whopping 1.5 months' supply for the world of oil. So it's really not that much. But however, Sean, I don't think they're ever going to even get a drop of that oil out of the ground. It's just not commercially viable, and that goes now with this thermodynamic oil collapse. We're going to see what is known as a limit to the amount of energy that this barrel will actually put out in work, and we're getting to that, and that's going to happen here in the future, as well as the oil price is going to continue to fall. So this new energy find, in the whole scheme of things, doesn't really mean anything. It's even if they could extract the oil, Sean, it's very little oil. And also, I doubt they'll be able to extract it because the price of oil is going to continue to fall. And they're going to need over $100 to make that project viable. So I don't see that ever happening.
All right. Well, can you explain to the audience why it is that you focus on oil and energy so fiercely and that it's become a core of your research? The discoveries and the extrication of the oil is plummeting. Just explain to us what that means for our way of life in the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years.
Okay, before I say that, Sean, humans early on, when we were simple farmers, we had an innate understanding of the energy return on investment. And I was speaking with Louis Arnoux out of France, who was one of the gentlemen that did the research on this thermodynamic oil collapse. And the farmers back then, they didn't consider farming as in how many acres they owned. They actually dealt with their land and how long it would take to harvest. So acres, like a farmer today says, I got 1,000 acres. That was meaningless to the farmers back in the Middle Ages. They were farming how many they could. They were getting land by how much they could harvest. And there was a reason for that. So the early farmers, the early humans, when we were living off the land, we had an innate understanding of the importance of how much energy it took to create the food, which was our energy. As we moved to the cities and we started having a lot more agriculture, people in the cities forgot this. They just no longer dealt with it. So what happened? We had supply and demand. And that's where the economic principle of supply and demand came from. And so when more energy, as in cheap like coal and wood, coal, and then oil came on the picture, and as the technology advanced, well, we really forgot about this energy return on investment, or how important energy is, the basic principle that drives our economies. We totally forgot about it. Very similar to when Nixon dropped the gold dollar peg. Americans totally forgot about gold being the actual monetary source of economics. So not only are Americans suffering from 45 years of fiat monetary amnesia, most people in the world have no idea that energy is the driver. And as Lewis says, it's like they think the tooth fairy runs everything, and it isn't. It's the energy. So the issue is this. The energy return on investment has been continuing to fall, and these gentlemen have actually designed a model. And Bedford Hill was the first person to put this model together, the Hills Group, which was, he was a project manager of about 5 or 6 engineers, and they spent over 10,000 hours designing this model to find out what would happen with oil since we started producing it. And what happens is there's the amount of energy in a barrel of oil, Sean, in 1900 is the same amount of energy as it is today. The problem is the second law of thermodynamics states that it takes more energy in time to produce that oil. With anything. And they have created a formula, a calculation, a model to see this. And within 10 years, they're saying in a decade, there will no longer be net energy available to the economy that we could use it. It'll be a net zero gain. And we need, let's say consumers, the economy needs that net energy to make cars, build homes, and et cetera. So when there's no net energy, well, you can fire all the economists, because then there's no supply and demand. Mm-hmm. So I used to think, like most economists still think, that supply and demand is the basic fundamental principle of our modern society and economy. It's not. Thermodynamics is. Supply and demand only can happen if there's surpluses. Well, we've had a lot of surpluses, Sean, because when we first started tapping into oil, there's serious surpluses. Most of the energy that we took out of oil was all net energy. We had a lot of profitable oil. Back in the 1900s, 1930, it only took 1 barrel's worth of energy to produce 100 barrels of oil for the U.S. Industry. We had 99 profitable barrels. Shale oil comes at 5 to 1. So there's only 4 now. Now, in 1920, according to the scientists studying the EROI, Sean, we were finding 1,200 barrels of oil for the cost of the energy in 1 barrel. Now it's less than 5 to 1. So if you look at the numbers, and if you look at the math and the science, peak oil and abiotics, people who don't believe in peak oil or the abiotic theory, that's totally discounted now. But they don't look at the information. They don't look at the data. So what is the problem now? And I'll conclude here. Our economy, our complex economy that is agriculture, that is transportation system, bridges, roads, infrastructure, water systems, sewage systems, telephone, internet, and then we have to include healthcare, education. All that devours oil. It needs profitable oil. It needs nearly 20 to 1. Well, 5 to 1 shale does not allow us to run the system, Sean, which is why we've been importing oil from Saudi Arabia. They had high energy return on investment oil, but that's been falling too. So where do we make up the difference as the energy return on investment fell? Ever since 1970, we've added debt, and now the debt has gone exponential, and it can't be sustainable. So this is the predicament we're in. I will conclude by saying all the symptoms of monetary printing by the Fed, the debt, all the shenanigans by the elite, all the propping up of the market, all of that is basically to offset the falling energy return on investment. And now they're getting to the point where they can't do it anymore.
All right. Well, we know we're in a lot of trouble then if oil is really as good as gold and they're not finding as much of it. Of course, we're in this deflationary environment. You're saying that when demand returns, if and when the economy, the global economy ever recovers, oil, since we don't have zero-point energy, and we can talk about these WikiLeaks Podesta emails, which actually mention zero-point energy, if you'd like. I find it fascinating. But until we get new forms of energy, we are stuck in this old paradigm, this quote-unquote fossil fuels paradigm. I don't believe they're from fossils, but nevertheless, oil and gas and coal, that's the paradigm we're in. And against the backdrop of everything you've just said, Steve, as you well know, the United Nations and Agenda 2030, Agenda 21 policies want to move us toward a world in which we don't even get to use those old technologies to provide the energy we need. It seems to me that one way or the other, we're headed back toward serfdom.
I'll get into that in a minute. Just to give you data points, and when you look at the real numbers, they don't lie. The world spent a lot of money last year, and we found 2.9 billion barrels of new oil, supposedly. Well, that's great, but we consumed 10 times that last year. We consumed 29 billion. Now, how sustainable is this? This year, it's going to be even worse. So, Sean, we're living on past reserves, we're living on past exploration, and the problem is now the oil companies, the major oil companies, they realized this at the end of 2013. They needed 120 for their big new projects, a barrel of oil. That's what they needed. They weren't getting it. After 3 years, we were getting 100, maybe a little more than 100, but we weren't going to 110 or 120. And they needed 120. So they started cutting exploration big time at the end of 2013. It wasn't until the middle of 2014 did the price of oil really start to fall. And let me tell you this. Again, the grand conspiracy is, and Lindsey Williams talks about this. He continues. I like the man. He seems like he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think his heart's in the right place.
It is, and so I don't fault him for that. But he said he's hung around the elite and the oil industry, and they are manipulating everything. It's a big conspiracy. Well, that would be fine if the oil companies were making money hand over fist. Now, in 2011, after ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron paid their capital and dividends, they did have $16 billion left over, which is pretty good. But the 6 months this year, the first 6 months of this year, those three companies were in the hole for $18 billion. That's a big. It's never been that bad for them. So if it is a grand conspiracy, they're borrowing money just to pay dividends. Well, ConocoPhillips was the first one to finally get some common sense, and they have significantly lowered their dividend from 75 cents a quarter down to 25 cents. Now, I know ExxonMobil and Chevron are going to do the same thing because they're losing a lot of money. So there's no longer a grand conspiracy by the oil companies to control everything because they're losing money hand over fist. And this just gets worse. The shale oil companies are in debt up to their eyeballs. They're not making any money at all. Matter of fact, their debt has exploded in the last 7 years. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the information, Sean, I'm looking around, and I don't see a grand conspiracy here. I see a disaster. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately enough, people don't understand that.
Yeah, I see the disaster too, and it helps to have you articulate it for us because those of us who are paying attention to the monetary malfeasance of the Federal Reserve and the central banks can see the disaster through the papering over. We know what's going on with the money printing and, again, those derivatives. But let's stay on point here as it relates to we the people in the United States. Obama's final budget explodes deficit to $590 billion. This was reported back on August 29th. The real number now is probably even higher than that. It represents a 35% increase, and it brings debt held by the public to the highest share of GDP in this country since 1952. Steve, what does the disaster of U.S. deficits and debt mean for gold and silver? They can't suppress it forever. What does this conversation eventually lead to for gold and silver?
Yeah, and I agree. I wrote an article about that. And before I get into that, the bonds, the bonds out there, government sovereign bonds that have negative interest rates, have doubled in 6 months from $6.5 trillion to over 13 trillion. I think it's 13.5 trillion.
Wow.
That have negative interest rates. Now, the reason why that is happening is because when you've got all this massive debt out there, you have to service it. And if you service it at normal 4, 5, or 6% interest rates,
It's game over.
it'll break the bank.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why everyone's going to zero interest rates or negative. Now, if we look at, and I wrote this article called Must-See Charts, the U.S. Government Financial Disaster versus Gold and Silver, I just took the interest on debt we paid last year, which was $402 billion, 10% of our supposed $4 trillion budget. That's what we spent. I think we spent a lot more than that, but that's what they say. So we'll take that number. We paid $402 billion in interest last year, the U.S. government did. Well, do you know what that could buy? Total global gold and silver production last year cost $136 billion, Sean. The U.S. government's interest on the debt would have paid for 3 years of all global gold and silver production. And now it gets worse than that. I looked at the deficits, and if we look at the deficits the U.S. government has officially announced between 2011 to 2015, it equaled $4.2 trillion. It's probably a lot higher than that, but let's just go with the $4.2 trillion. Well, if we take 30 years worth of global gold production last year and silver, that's what would equal the 4.2 trillion deficits that we've had since the last 5 years. Now, how much gold is that? That's 3 billion ounces of gold we could have purchased just with the deficits. That's all the known gold in the world in investment and central bank holdings, all private and central bank. We would be able to buy all of it. What I didn't mention before, the interest on the debt, which was $402 billion, Sean, would have been able to purchase more than all the gold that the U.S. supposedly has in reserve, which is 8.1 thousand tons. We don't have that, but that's just the interest on the debt last year could have purchased all of our U.S. reserves. But let's get to this. The next thing, it would have purchased all the gold, investment in central bank, just a 5 years worth of deficits. It would have also purchased all the silver that was produced in the world since 1950, 26 billion ounces.
Wow.
So that just goes to show you how insane the system has become when you look at the deficits compared to what it would purchase in gold and silver.
Yeah, completely detached from reality. And the question that begs to be asked is when this bond bubble, in this derivatives bubble, in this stock market bubble implodes or explodes, where is all of that money going to go, Steve?
Well, that's a great question, and I was talking to Louis this morning about it. We're going to discuss this in the 6 charts. And if we go by actual wealth creation by GDP or per head of U.S. citizen, or in oil barrel per head, or in gold, they all crashed years ago. Gold and oil crashed. Wealth creation. You see, you can't create wealth. You can't create wealth if the gold and oil per head crashes. You can only create wealth if the oil and gold per head per each U.S. person increases. Well, it's crashed. So what we have is the GDP is going up exponentially towards 18 trillion, and the value of gold and oil are plummeting per head. So there is a big disconnect, and it will crash. And it will crash based upon thermodynamics and the laws of creating wealth, real wealth. And so the issue is, where are they going to go? I think people are going to get precious metal religion, Sean. That's what I call it. They're going to get precious metal religion, and they're going to get it much, unfortunately, later than sooner. And even if we just get another 1% of the population buying gold and silver, it's game over.
Yeah.
What's 1%? Just a doubling.
Yeah.
So if you get, so this is the problem we're facing. There's just actually not enough gold and silver out there. People say, well, yes, there's plenty of gold and silver. They'll just raise the price. But you know what? There really isn't. I mean, the global assets out there are $250 trillion, which stocks, bonds, real estate, insurance funds.
Yeah.
That's where all the wealth has gone, or supposed wealth. So when you just take a fraction of that into gold and silver, the values of those. Now, let me just finish by saying this. I don't know whether we're going to see 50,000 gold and 2,000 or 1,000 silver. But I do know this. The values of most stocks, bonds, and real estate are going to collapse, and the value of physical gold and silver are going to increase and be able to buy you things in the world in the future, or give you options that most paper assets and stocks, bonds, and real estates will not. That's the guarantee.
Repeat that phrase that you said about religion and gold. What was the phrase?
I call it precious metal religion.
Yeah, I like that. It reminds me that there are no atheists in foxholes. And when the detachment from reality, these markets and the explosion of these bubbles becomes apparent to the populace, I 100% agree with you. People are going to get religion, and they're going to learn about real money. Those of us who have been studying this, reporting on it, and discussing it for years now are well ahead of the game because, as you know, Steve, most of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues are sound asleep. They see their little ones and zeros statement from their brokerage firm in their IRAs or their 401ks, and they're excited because the Dow's at 18,000 or whatever, and they don't understand that the Federal Reserve, the people who founded the Federal Reserve, are the same people who are friends with the Clintons and promoting Hillary's campaign. They don't understand that the central bankers have destroyed everything behind the scenes. And the behind the scenes part is what's really interesting because it's becoming readily apparent to those of us who are looking at the facts that you've just discussed here in this interview. It's readily apparent to us that the collapse is happening. We're documenting the collapse. The collapse of Deutsche Bank, the collapse of the derivatives. The derivatives alone, Steve, might bring that notional value of all worldwide money to over $1 quadrillion. I think you mentioned 250 trillion. I don't even think that counts derivatives. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. All right, so I'm sort of babbling, but I wanted to ask you this. What is your position on the best mining companies that have precious metals and are mining them today as we speak, not just reserves in the ground? Do you see a day when people get religion as it relates to these companies and the assets that they produce? What's your take on mining stocks? I'm just curious.
Okay, and I want to answer that, but I want to just say one more thing about the energy. The notion is, and the elite have been controlling everything. Actually, they're controlling the energy. They're controlling the energy, which controls everything. And so the biggest problem, the biggest misconception that let's say people who follow the alternative media, they believe in the future that the elite are going to continue to take more control of the system. Well, the falling energy return on investment and the thermodynamic oil collapse, guess what? It destroys the biggest corporations, the biggest entities, and the biggest governments the worst. That's where the leverage is on the energy return on investment. It's going to be the people in the small rural areas that are actually going to do the best. Because if you and I went out to our garden, Sean, and we produced our own crops, it's an energy return on investment of 5 to 1. It's pretty profitable. Our modern agricultural processing, harvesting, and distribution system is a huge net energy loser of 1 to 10. We're burning 10 calories of energy to put 1 calorie of food on the dinner plate. Mm-hmm. It's a disaster. So what I'm trying to tell your listeners, don't fear the elite, because the elite are going to be taken out. because the thermodynamic collapse is going to hurt them the most. And so now getting back to the mining industry.
Can I say one thing?
I do.
It's heartening to hear you say that because, of course, we all hope that the elite meet their just ends, and sooner than later. God knows the elites seem hell-bent on taking us into World War III with Putin, a war that nobody other than neocons and these elite central bankers seem to want. But I just want to say, your information, the information you just shared about how this thermodynamic collapse is going to hurt the elite the most, seems to be congruent with a lot of the things Cliff High's WebBot research has been indicating will happen. Let's see how it plays out, guys, but maybe there is a happy ending for humanity here. And if Steve's right and the elite get hurt the worst, that means bad things for the banksters. All right, now mining stocks, your take.
Okay, this is one of those, I always value the physical metals first, gold and silver. That's the number one thing to own, is the physical metals. No paper, physical metals, no leverage. Now, the next thing is the miners. I actually wrote an article today about the copper mining industry, the two top copper miners. They're in big trouble. So I'm not much of a believer in the base metals. They're not going to do that well. However, there's a good chance that especially the silver miners, and the reason why the silver miners, the primary silver miners, and there's not that many of them, Sean. I follow about 12 of them, and they actually trade on the New York Stock Exchange. I follow about 12 of them, and there are more, like Fresnillo out of Mexico, but they trade on the London Stock Exchange. So I really don't follow them. But the thing is, the primary silver miners will actually, I think, turn out better in this thermodynamic oil collapse for a while, because it takes so much less energy to produce silver. It takes 120 times less liquid fuel to produce an ounce of silver than it does to produce an ounce of gold. And I've done the calculations, checking Barrick, Newmont, the top gold miners. So I believe in the future, when things start falling apart, and we've seen some of that already this year. There's been a lot of people moving into, funds moving into the miners, silver and gold miners. It's been a sell-off recently, but I think we could see a big movement in the precious metal miners, whether gold or silver. And I do favor the primary silver miners more than the gold miners. Mm-hmm. And I can't guarantee what's going to happen, but there's probably a good handful of those. Matter of fact, almost any of them. I can go down the list. There's Pan American Silver. There's Hecla. Hecla's in the United States. There's First Majestic, even though they've been under a little pressure lately. There's Fortuna Silver, which is one of my favorite ones, Fortuna Silver. There's Great Panther. There's Silver Standard. There's a lot of them. A dozen of them. I can mention all of them. I think they all will do pretty good. We have no idea what's going to happen, though, if there's nationalization of mines. So, to me, we could see funds moving into the mining industry because it's hard to access the metal. Mm-hmm. And, there's no... See, when you're trying to buy metal and you can't get the metal because, let's say, there's a shortage for a while or it's just tight, well, there's no shortage in shares. There may be only so many shares out there, Sean, but the price will go up. That's what will change. That's where the pressure will go in. When there's so many people moving into them, the price will go up. So I think it might be wise to consider owning some of the precious metal miners, and especially the silver miners. But this should not be a large portion of your investment. This should be a very small, where if you lose it, you don't care. Mm-hmm. Of course, people who have a lot more money, Sean, they can invest a lot more and lose more. So that's how I look at the mining industry going forward. And to tell you the truth, with this new thermodynamic collapse information, I'm going to be discussing this more on my site. Things are going to change quickly. I mean, Bedford Hill of the Hills Group, the project manager, he forecast that within 10 years, 75% of the U.S. Gas stations are going to be closed. Okay. And the oil industry will have disintegrated. And we have to remember, even though there's still coal, and there's still hydro, and there's still natural gas, and solar and wind, they don't do much, unfortunately. But the problem is our transportation system is dependent 90%, 95% on oil. And as you know, Walmart doesn't stock anything. It's all in the trucks that go up and down the roads, as well as all of our groceries. So everything is based upon transportation. That's our whole system is based upon transportation. And when that falls apart, the system crashes because we're a just-in-time inventory system.
That's right.
So that's the big problem that people do. Even though they say, well, we'll just build batteries, we'll have electric cars, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
To run one semi-tractor trailer loaded 80,000 pounds of food, you need a 70,000-pound battery. It's not going to happen. We don't have the technology for that. However, Louis Arnault does have some interesting technology called Engenie, and we'll be discussing this during our interview. And of all the technologies I've looked at, Sean, his technology is the only one that may help solve our problem, because his technology is the only technology that is taking away all the inefficiencies of our energy. Because when you have coal-fired plant, of the 100 units of coal that's created, very little bit of that actual coal that burns electricity, it's all lost before it even gets to the homeowner or the manufacturing plant. It's very inefficient. This goes with combustible engines and everything else. Solar is very inefficient. Wind is very inefficient. The grid is very inefficient. However, Louis Arnault's Engenie technology actually takes away a lot of that inefficiency. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, we're getting to the point where it's becoming too late to solve the problem, and it may not be able to be solved. So the last question you asked me, what happens here? Where do we go from here? And I was talking to Louis this morning. He studies this one gentleman. His name is Latouche. We have two choices. We either degrow ourselves out of this. We have to. We can't grow infinitely. We can manageably degrow ourselves out of this, and this new technology may be a way to do that. Or the second option is barbarism. And it looks as if we're probably going to suffer a combination of both, depending on where you live.
Yeah, I worry about that, and everybody knows what's going on in Venezuela, where the conditions have become completely untenable in the face of the collapse of their currency. And if you don't mind, I would just like to use this term from my friend Kev Baker. He uses the term woo-woo. Can we just, in the last 5 minutes here, just discuss a little woo-woo? Are you okay with that? I know you're a straight shooter, and I really respect your research, so I don't want to get too far off track here with 0 Point Energy, but I do want to say this as it pertains to technologies that can help humanity. There are very smart people out there that seem to really care. If you want to watch an interesting documentary, watch Billions and Change. It's about Manoj Bhargava, the founder of 5 Hour Energy, and his efforts to bring new technologies, to bring energy to the third world, which according to Steve here may soon be us, and we could use some of these technologies as well. If you want to see a billionaire who seems like a very good guy doing good things, standing in stark opposition to people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, check out Billions in Change. All right, you ready for the woo-woo, Steve?
Sure.
All right, here's the woo-woo. WikiLeaks Podesta emails mention 0 Point Energy. Now, supposedly, this is from Apollo 14 astronaut and the 6th man to quote-unquote walk on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, to John Podesta. And he writes, now you tell me, is this propaganda, or are things starting to leak out because the elite see what's coming, some of the things you've described, and are terrified? Here's the quote. Dear John, because the war in space race is heating up, I felt you should be aware of several factors as you and I schedule our Skype talk. Remember, our non-violent ETI from the contiguous universe are helping us bring 0 Point Energy to Earth. They will not tolerate any forms of military violence on Earth or in space. The following information in italics was shared with me by my colleague Carol Rosen, who worked closely for several years with Wernher von Braun before his death. Carol and I have worked on the Treaty on the Prevention of the Placement of Weapons in Outer Space, attached for your convenience, end quote. Now, you want to talk about woo-woo. Supposedly, this is from Edgar Mitchell. We don't even know if this email is real, but it's part of the Podesta WikiLeaks email leaks. And he mentions 0 Point Energy. So many of us have believed for a long time that the powers that be have been suppressing forms of energy that are far better than these carbon-based forms of energy like oil. What are your thoughts on any of that? What are your thoughts that potentially the elite, the breakaway civilization described by Catherine Austin Fitts and Joseph P. Farrell, what are the chances that these people have harnessed or are in the process of harnessing zero-point energy? And is there a chance they'll ever release it to we the people?
That's an entirely separate interview. I think
we need more than 5 minutes for that, don't we?
Yeah, I think this is the issue. We can't know everything, and there has to be some other intelligent life in the galaxy. That being said, I look at it this way. If there is zero-point energy and the elite don't want us to get it, we're not going to get it. So collapse is coming. That's just logical. So the other option is there isn't zero-point energy, and the collapse is coming. The collapse is coming regardless. Right. I hate to be that way. Right. Now the thing is, if the elite have been controlling things for hundreds and thousands of years, I mean, there have been times it's been more local. Yeah, it's been more local, regional tribes and tribal kind of events, but especially in the last 500 years, it's more the elites, especially the banking system that came out of Europe, started to control everything. So, yeah, even if there is zero-point energy, I don't know if there is or not. I haven't seen enough evidence of it, and actually I'm going to ask Louis Arnaud because zero-point energy would have to adhere to the law of thermodynamics. And so, again, if they do have it, they're probably not going to allow us to get it. And I don't know what this zero-point energy would entail, because you've got to be able to use it. You have to be able to create some kind of actual model or some kind of actual technology, and that takes time. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think you're just going to put this little tiny 1-inch thing box in your car and it'll run forever. There has to be some kind of logistical way of bringing this new zero-point energy into the market, and this is the issue, Sean. This is the issue, even with possibly Louis Arnaud's and Jenny. There's a logistical problem of bringing this stuff into the market, and the longer we wait for whatever works, the closer we are to really collapsing, because, again, the oil is the most important energy in our system. If we were just sitting around, didn't have transportation, we were living locally with coal-fired plants and hydro, we wouldn't be concerned with oil, but we were traveling all over the place. And so I don't know if that best answers your solution, but I'll tell you what, during my interview next week with Louis, I am going to ask him that exact question, what he thinks about the idea of the zero-point energy, and if there's a chance of it, if it's real, or his opinion. So I definitely would love to do that.
Okay. One of the other reasons I bring up the zero-point energy thing is because the increasing sightings of UFOs around the world captured on smartphones, etc., seems to be rising exponentially, and some of the footage really suggests that it's either off-planet life visiting this planet or it's terrestrial vehicles that we're not being told about. But I think that is the interesting question of all of these sightings of unidentified flying objects around the world. How many of them are of terrestrial origin? And if any of them are of terrestrial origin, it definitely speaks to a technology far advanced from the one that is now public-facing. Thanks for having this woo-woo conversation with me, Steve. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your intellect. Thank you.
Oh, hey, Sean, likewise. And we'll continue having this discussion, but I do believe all the derivatives, all the massive derivatives, all the leverage, all the debt has been used to offset this falling energy return on investment. I mean, it just goes hand in hand. When some people see some of these charts, we'll be making them public, you can't deny it. Mm-hmm. Our GDP should be 1/10 of what it is. Mm-hmm. 1/10. It shouldn't be 17, 18 trillion. It should be 1/10 of what it is, not quarter or half, 1/10. And so it's all fiction. It's all fictitious. It's all based on money printing. And I mean, let me just say this before we go. In one of my last articles, we've increased 31 trillion in U.S. net worth since 2010. We've gone from like 58 trillion. Now we're at 89 trillion. So we've increased 30 trillion in just 6 years. Well, our energy consumption is the exact same. It's actually less. Well, if you go back to 1950 to 2000, U.S. energy consumption total, all of it, increased. It tripled from 1950 to 2000. Most of it happened like to 1970 and 80, but it tripled. Well, that's where our GDP came from. That's where our increase of GDP it has to. People don't get that. They think of all these other obtuse things, but that's where the GDP growth comes from, the increase of energy. Mm-hmm. And now we've increased the net worth of the United States 31 trillion in 6 years based upon hot air and mirror and smoke and mirror accounting. So I want your listeners to realize how disconnected it is. And it will crash. Even if we have new technology that might work to offset things, Sean, a lot of things are still going to crash because they're not going to work. So I just wanted to end that, and it'll be interesting. I'd love to talk with you again in the next couple of months to see what happens after this crazy election.
Yeah, me too, and I really appreciate it. And guys, if you want to read a very gripping article that summarizes exactly what he was just saying, Steve wrote an article called "Warning: The Coming Collapse of U.S. Net Worth Will Wipe Out Millions of Americans." And guys, the website is srsroccoreport.com. Thank you, Steve.
All right, Sean, you have a great day.
You too. I very much appreciate your time. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We very much appreciate you liking this video. And please share it with others. It's the only way to get the information to your friends and family. Share it with them. And thanks so much for your support. God bless.